that elections would soon begin for the chiefs of the large and small points of theirs, or as they say, towns and villages, and that these elections would proceed on the following principles. Those were to be elected as chiefs for the towns and villages, who would put in their sacred vessels more of what are called kroons than others. A kroon was the name given then in Egypt to sacrificial offerings. The point is that according to what is called the religion of the beings of this country, it was the custom, among others, during religious ceremonies which proceeded in special places to put before each ordinary being who went to these ceremonies special clay vessels, so that each ordinary being there had to put into these sacred vessels, each time, after the utterances of certain prayers, vegetables or fruit specially designated for the given day. Well, these worthy things for offering as sacrifices were then called kroons. In all probability, this manipulation was devised by the theocrats of that time as a profitable item for the welfare of their, as they are called, sycophants. In that decree, about which I've just told you, it was stated that on that occasion kroons had to consist of the eyes of outcasts, by which word the ordinary three-brained beings there called those beings behind their backs, who belonged to the caste of the ruling class, by which name then all the beings of this caste wholesale were called, without excluding the beings of the passive half, children and old folk. Further, in this announcement it was stated that he who would have, on the day of the elections, the most kroons in his sacred vessel, would be appointed as chief of the whole of Egypt, and in the remaining towns and villages those would be appointed as chiefs, who in their sacred vessels had the correspondingly greatest number of kroons. You may picture to yourself, my boy, what on that day began to be accomplished everywhere on that Egypt, in order to have in their sacred vessels the greatest number of eyes of the beings who belonged in that period of the flow of time to the caste of the ruling class. On another occasion, also there in Egypt, I became witness of a not less terrifying scene. For a clear representation about this, also terrifying scene, it is first of all necessary to tell you that there, that is, on this Egypt, there was formerly, in every one of their large points or towns, a large square, on which proceeded all kinds of public, as they are called, religious and military ceremonies, where during these ceremonies were gathered masses of the beings from the whole of Egypt. These beings, and especially the masses of beings who belonged at a given moment to the weak castes, impeded the ceremonies, and therefore a certain pharaoh ordered ropes to be stretched around these squares so that the beings who belonged to the simple castes should not disturb the progress of the ceremony. But when the said ropes were stretched, it soon became evident that they would not withstand the pressure of the crowd and might often break. Then the pharaoh ordered what are called metal ropes to be made, whereupon those who were called priests there consecrated them and gave them the name of sacred cables. These sacred cables around the squares for the public ceremonies, particularly in the large towns of Egypt, had at that time a colossal length, sometimes reaching to 1 centrotino, or as the contemporary beings of your planet would say, 10 miles long. Well, I was a witness of how a crowd of ordinary Egyptian beings began to string on to one of these sacred cables, just like an Asiatic shishlik. The beings, without distinction of sex or age, who up till then had belonged to the ruling class. And the very same night, with the help of 40 pairs of buffaloes, this original skewer was dragged and thrown into the river Nile. I saw this punishment meted out in this spirit, both during my stay personally on the surface of this planet of yours, as well as through the large Tescoano from the planet Mars. And these contemporary favorites of yours, naive already to the nth degree, grew sincerely indignant that these contemporary Bolsheviks of theirs shot a certain Tom Brown. If we compare the actions of the former three-brained beings there who were subject to this psychic state with the action of these contemporary Bolsheviks, then they, i.e. the contemporary Bolsheviks, ought even to be given praise and thanks, that in spite of the fact that the various consequences of the properties of the organ Kundabuffer are infallibly completely crystallized in their common presences, as in general in the presences of contemporary three-brained beings, they, in the very heat of that period when they were entirely puppets under the influences of the inevitable cosmic law Solunensius, manifested themselves with these consequences in such a way that the dead body of the person shot by them could at least be recognized as whose it was, namely Tom Brown's and nobody else's. In this place of his tale, Beelzebub deeply sighed, and gazing at one spot, became concentratedly thoughtful. Hussein and Ahun, with a shade of surprise, but also with some sadness on their faces, began to stare expectantly at him with, as it were, a stark, fixed gaze. A little later, Hussein, having first made quite an unintelligible grimace, and then with a voice expressing pained tenderness, turned to Beelzebub, who was still continuing to think. "Grandfather, dear grandfather, manifest please aloud those informations which you have in your common presence particularly dear to me, and which you have learned during your long existence, and which may serve me as material for the elucidation of that question which has just arisen in my essence, and even for the approximate representation of which I have as yet positively no data for a logical confrontation in any of the spiritualized parts of my common presence. This question arising in my essence, the answer to which has already become necessary to the whole of my presence, consists in this: to inquire about the reasons why, namely, if these unfortunate three-brained beings who breed on the planet Earth do not have the possibility, owing to reasons not depending on themselves, of acquiring and having in the period of their responsible existence divine objective reason, why, since they arose so long ago, and their species have continued to exist such a long time, could not those customs have been gradually formed by now, only thanks to the flow of time in the process of their ordinary existence, even under those abnormal conditions, and those proper instinctive automatic habits have been acquired in the presences of every being in general, thanks to which their ordinary existence, both egotistically personal as well as collectively general, might flow more or less tolerably in the sense of objective reality. Having said this, our poor Hussein began questioningly to gaze at the cause of his arising. At the question of his favorite grandson, Beelzebub began to relate the following.